Okay, here's my video on how to create a drawing from a grid that's a photograph. It's going to be several steps. There are certain parts that need to be pretty precise, so we'll go over it step by step. Now, let's go over the steps first. So the first step is you need a piece of paper to draw on, and you need a photo to draw from. And you need to draw a grid on your paper and the grid on the photo, and those two grids should match. So if one has 8 boxes on the long side, the other should have 8 boxes on the long side, etc. So after you put the grid on your paper, then you're going to draw the outline of the image first. Again, we're looking at the squares, going square to square, really comparing the edges where the contour lines cross the grid lines, paying attention to the relationships to the center of the square, to the corners of the square, and getting the outline first, because the outline is where you're going to make most of your mistakes, and it's where it's the easiest to correct the mistakes, just by changing the outline. Then next, you're going to draw all the contour lines, and remember at this stage there should be no shading at all. And then the next is you're going to erase the grid lines. And it's really important to erase those grid lines before you do number 5, which is shade the image to match the photo. Once you start shading, you don't really want to be erasing unnecessary things, so that erasing needs to be done beforehand. And then lastly, for this project, we're not going to be drawing the background, we're just going to be leaving it blank. Okay, so let's go over everything step by step. First, you're going to get a piece of paper and a ruler, and you're going to make marks evenly spaced apart across your page. For this project, I've decided that we're going to do 1.5 inch boxes. Your project may vary, but for now we're going to stick to the 1.5. It could be 1 inch, it could be 2 inches, it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to line my ruler with the edge of the page, and I'm going to start drawing in those lines. Now, the precision here is really important. If you do not draw those lines exactly the right space apart, then you are going to get uneven boxes that aren't square, that are more rectangular, some that are taller, some that are shorter. And in that case, if you don't do it exactly right, exactly 1.5 all the way around, then you will have a distorted image. It will distort the image. So if the box gets longer and taller, then the image will get longer and taller just in that square. So that's really important. Alright, notice as we draw the lines going across, connecting the lines from the top to the bottom, that they're drawn very lightly. That's so that they're easy to erase later on. We're going to do the same process on the other sides. Alright, 1.5 inches, 1.5 inches, 1.5 inches, 1.5 inches, all the way down the side. 1.5 is a nice number because it's easy to add. If you do something like 1 3/16, then it becomes harder. So here, it's a little bit easier. We get 1.5, add 1.5 is 3, add 1.5 is 4.5, add 1.5 is 6, add 1.5 is 7.5, etc. It's a little bit easier than trying to add a bunch of tiny 16ths. Then again, we're going to line it up. Again, draw those lines really lightly. It's really important, otherwise you're going to have a grid that you cannot erase. And then that just is going to look ugly. An unerased grid almost looks worse than a partially erased grid almost looks worse than not erasing it at all. Now to the photo. We've got to measure the photo, and we're going to divide it by the number of boxes on our paper. So on our paper that we used, we had 8 boxes going across the long side. Now your paper may be horizontal or vertical, but again, we're going to do the long side first. So in this case, my long side is 10 inches long. So I'm going to write that down, 10 inches. And we got to divide that by how many boxes we have. So that's 8. So it was 10 divided by 8 equals 1.25. So my paper was 1.5, now these are 1.25. And now I recognize that some people have a hard time adding 1.25 plus 1.25 plus 1.25. So If you can do that, that's better. But if you can't, then it's just as fine to just move the ruler each time, measuring 1 1/4. It's not quite as accurate, but it'll be good enough for our purposes. So here you go, drawing them all the way across, just like that, moving the ruler each time, making sure that everyone's exactly 1 1/4 apart. And then you go ahead and do that all the way around, as you can see here. All right, once you have that, you line up the marks with your ruler and you're going to draw the grid lines. Notice that these grid lines are nice and dark. And that's because on this picture, it doesn't matter. This is not your artwork. So making the grid lines highly visible is preferred. Now is the step to go box by box to draw the outline, the outer edge of the shade. So as you draw it, just be careful that each box matches the other box, pay attention to the proportions, and before you move on past this point, double check everything. Make sure everything's in the right square that it should be, that it doesn't look somehow wonky to you or messed up. If it is, then maybe you probably made a mistake somewhere. Maybe you put the ear in the wrong box, or the head is 2 squares high instead of 3 squares high. Depending on your picture, it'll change. But make sure this part is right before you move on. Next, we're going to draw the contour lines. And here I have a little sped up movie version of myself drawing the contour lines for this project. Notice I'm sticking to contour lines, and on the fur, I'm trying to find lights and darks and find the edges of those lights and darks so I know where to shade darker, where to shade lighter. But it's not perfect. You don't want to get too detailed, find all those tiny little details. You want to just get the major areas on those contour lines. Then after that, then you need to erase the grid lines. Okay? So erase those lines. Be kind of careful that you are not erasing your contour lines too much, but if you erase them a little bit, it's really not that big a deal. But do remember, don't do this section until you, or don't do the shading until you've erased those grid lines. So here we're going to start the shading. On this shading, again, I'm going to say it one more time, don't do this stage until those grid lines are erased. Because as you can see, once this is shaded, if you were then had to go back and erase your grid lines, you would just kind of destroy all the work that you just did by erasing it. So the contour lines, erasing them a little bit, is not a big deal. But the shading, that is a big deal. You really want to really pay attention to the shading, trying to match your lights and darks. However dark it is in the photo, you want to try to get it that dark on your picture. And also, you really want to shade in the direction of that hair for the hair or the fur. As you can see here in this picture, all my shading, if the fur is going in one direction, my shading is going in that direction. If you go the opposite direction of the fur, it's going to make it look flat and take away all dimension out of your picture. So, here are a few things to remember. One is take care with the measuring to really get perfectly square grid lines. That's really important so there's no distortion. 2, don't shade anything until that grid is erased. Especially don't shade the fur or the hair. You're going to really want to start shading things in, but really hold off onto it until that erasing of the grid is done. Contour lines, fine, do all those contour lines first. But the other lines, or the shading, or any dark values, you don't want to have to erase those. Shade the picture in the direction of the fur or hair. That's really important to keep that dimension going. And also really pay attention to small details and to lights and darks in the fur. And lastly, I know it's very common, but people really like to smear or smudge with their fingers. And on this project, we really want to try to avoid that. Try to practice shading just with the pencil and not by smearing it. If you smear, you're gonna get fingerprints all over your picture. It's gonna kind of look a little ugly and a little amateurish. So we always want to try to shade just with the pencil and never with our fingers. Our fingers have oil on them that will kind of get into the paper, and it just won't look good. So that's it. Good luck, and I hope to see good results from all of you.